This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions before we get started, guys? Anyone have any questions regarding the yesterday's session? Again, yesterday we were just looking at the data tier or the database applications like the SQL server. So we created an SQL server out here, added some networking rules here. Very importantly, I said I need to have access and I whitelisted my machine's IP out here, and then we had an SQL database inside which we ended up creating a table. We ended up creating something known as a table out here with multiple records. How did we again create the table? We used some queries. We used some queries called create table, insert into, and all these things out. Using different statements, we went inside our SQL server. So if I go into the database RG, data tier RG, this is what I have, which is nothing but the SQL server, and that is database out here. And if I go inside the database, I'll say query editor, and it's asking me to log in. So I'll just go ahead and use the login out here. And once I log in, again, today, if you see, my IP address is different. So the IP address that I was working yesterday and working today is different. It's a dynamic IP allocation that I have. So I'll just allow my IP out here. I can also click here telling that allow my IP address, and I'll say OK again. This should allow me to log inside it. And I have a table called DBO, database object dot course. And if I want to see the data inside it, I'll just select star from dbo dot course. Now to see what is there inside this particular table, and run this command, and this is going to give me a couple of records telling me what are all the records that are there inside this particular table out here as such. So this is what we were doing in very short. We were creating the databases and we were injecting the data inside that. So this is what we are doing out here. So yes, any questions still here? Any questions still here that I can take? Anyone? Any questions I can take till here?
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Go ahead, please.
Sir, at maximum, how many IPs we can whitelist this?
I'm sorry. Can you come again? What is the maximum?
Maximum IPs, IP number, or IP address we can whitelist there.
The maximum number of IP addresses that you can whitelist out here on a SQL server, if I'm not wrong, would be
Mm-hmm.
100. So if
Be
you go
100
into the
only.
networking, yes, 100.
Hmm.
It would
Okay.
be, let's say, 100 IP addresses out here as such.
Okay. Okay, sir. If we cross that number, what will happen?
Just a second. If we cross that number, it will just throw you an error if you want to add one more IP address out here. That's the reason we add a lot of virtual networks and
Okay. Okay. Okay.
provisions
Got it.
virtual machines for the developers so that they can use that particular virtual machines to talk to the SQL servers.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you. Got it.
Okay. Yes. Anything else, guys? Anyone? Any more questions here?
Hi
By chance,
Kiran,
it
good
is written
morning.
a sorry.
Good, please.
Yeah, Kiran, I want to know that this is as a DevOps engineer. So do we need to create a table like it's a structural query, right?
Just a
So
second. Yeah, sorry, just a second. Your voice is not that clear. Let me take it on my earphones. Just give me a second. Go ahead, please.
yeah, so as a DevOps engineer, so do we need to create a structural query language because it's a structural query is language is what we have created like data information we create in table form, right?
Hmm. Correct. So the question here is that as a DevOps engineer, do we need to, let's say, write the SQL language? No, you
Yes.
don't have to. This is not our duty to write the SQL. You either need to take the help of a database engineer or
Okay.
someone like a developer to help you create these queries. So you do not really have to even have a very slightest understanding of SQL. If you do, added advantage. If you don't, shouldn't be an issue.
Okay, so that the data already will be available in data in our server? You mean to suggest we need to maintain those data?
Not really.
Or
You can deploy the data as a DevOps engineer. You can take the data or you can take the queries from a database engineer, and you're expected to deploy that particular data onto a server. Even the deployment is something that we need to take care of, but writing those queries is something that you are not expected to do.
okay. So before this earlier like classes, the plot was there, right? So
Mhm.
swapping the code. So you were said
Yes.
that not able to like it's not our work to be write the description and the Java, whatever the language which we are using it,
Mhm.
like some person is using the JavaScript. So when we
Okay.
are swipe, at least we should know the language, right? Like example, we are making a changes in version 2
Mhm.
to 3.
Okay.
So when we are doing it, that means we are interacting in the
Mhm.
Java, right? It's
So
like
you're not really interacting with the JavaScript. You are just swapping the script from one version to the other. Doesn't mean that you go ahead and let's say, okay, just give me a second. Okay, I'm just putting you on mute for a second, so I'm getting a little bit of echo at your end. So yes, to answer to your question, if you need to swap a code from let's say version 1 to version 2, do you need to have an understanding? No, not really. You don't need to have an understanding of what's going in the code, but you need to have an understanding of what's going in the version. That what kind of a changes is this version really getting into, and depending upon the feedback from a developer or the feedback from let's say the release management team, you go ahead and make those changes accordingly. Like when I say that you have to swap it, it's not I as a DevOps engineer who's telling it. It's like I as a development team who's telling it or who's taking your help. And also in a real time environment, you won't be coming to that particular web application and doing a swap operation manually. You would have something called as CI/CD pipelines which are driving all these things. So when we come to Azure DevOps, we'll be seeing what are CI/CD pipelines and how do you automate all these swaps and all that stuff. Now, in a CI/CD structure, you create the infrastructure, you make the provision, and etc. and so on and so forth. And as a development team, I go ahead and let's say decide when do I need to swap. So yes, we do the provisioning, but the swapping, the initiation of swapping or the request for the swap needs to come from the development team out here as such. Does it answer your question? Yes, any more questions, guys?
Hi Kiran, as you told while we are creating the app service span, we are giving number of workers to like that.
Yes.
Uh, Number of two means the background some virtual machines two instances are creating and they will be balancing the requests.
Yes.
So
Yes. I.
can we
Mhm.
see the background virtual machines in the portal?
Can you come again? No, no. You cannot see the actual machine, virtual machine in the portal. No, you cannot do that. You can just tell
Okay.
Microsoft what are the number of instances that you need. And since this is a platform managed service, you won't be able to see the actual running virtual machine in the background out here as such.
Okay. So if we are giving two, then the background, it's kind of like two virtual instances are created.
Correct.
If we are giving three, then three are created.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any more questions, here, guys? Okay, so this is what I have today. And what I want to do is that, as I told you yesterday, is that if I go to a URL, I want to make it as simple as possible. If I want to, let's say, look at this particular data, I simply want to go to a URL called www dot something xyz dot azure websites dot net. This is the URL that I want to go to. So as a user, I don't want you to go inside the database. So as an end user, you're the end user out here who's consuming my application, meaning you are a student who's visiting to my institute, and I just want you to tell, or I just want you to give you what are all the courses that are available out here. So as this particular end user, I don't want you to, let's say, go all the way to the database, take the credentials, do something. No, I cannot give you the admin credentials. I cannot really do that. For which I am now trying to expose my entire data tier. So this is all called as a data tier out here. Over an internet, by using something called as an application tier or an application server, you can say, in the form of an Azure web app, which is running on a plan, which is running on top of, let's say, something called as an app service plan out here as such. So I have the app service plan ready, or I need to create the app service plan and etc. And what it does or what it needs to do is that when someone visits to this particular website, it should just take you to this particular app service. This app service, sorry, this app service should talk to the SQL server and internally to the SQL database, get all the tabular data and expose it to you over this particular browser. So this is your browser here, like Google Chrome, whatever it is. It should expose all this data over a browser out here. So what I'll do, I'll now start focusing upon the application tier. Yesterday we were focusing on the data tier. Today I'll now come down with the application tier today. So let's do that. So let's go back into our Azure portal and let's create a resource group called application tier. So I'll say or application tier RG, something like that. Let's say application tier or application tier RG. Again, I'll create the resource group same in ECS2. I'll say tags, I'll say app, I'll say front end app, I'll say review and create this out. Application tier is a front end, which means user is interacting with it. Data tier is a back end, which means only administrators in the back end are interacting with it. The actual user, meaning this guy, will not have any access to your backend tiers at all. Your backend tier should always be isolated. That's the difference between the data tier and the application tier. And mostly data tier will hold data, sensitive information. Application tier is mostly to, let's say, for you to use it, for you to consume it, so on and so forth. So now I have the application tier RG. So it's a different resource group that I created. So I want to isolate my data tier and the application tier. So I created two different resource groups. Coming into this particular resource group, I'll now create something known as an app service or a web app. So let's talk about web app here. And I'll say this is web app. I'll say create. I'll say create a web app out here as such. So let me go ahead hit this. Let me wait for a second for this, let's say, portal to load. And once it loads, fine. Let me reload this page and try to do this once again. Not sure why it is a little slow. So let's go to app service, create. And once we hit the create button, it's now asking you questions like what is the subscription? What is the resource group? I'll say it is application tier RG. The name of the web, I'll say this is app tier web app tier web app 0 or USEs 2, something like this, so that the name is simple. Dot Azure websites dot net. I'm now telling that please publish it in the form of a code. We'll talk about what is Docker container and a static website is. And I'll say it is .NET Core 3.1. I'll select this particular stack language application. I'll say the region is ECS2 again. Plan, I'll just change the plan, say it in telling that this is a demo plan. And I'll change the size to a free tier size out here. So I'll start with free. I'll say apply. Again, there are a lot of features that you will not get with a free tier plan, but it's okay. Just go ahead and change this out. And I'll say next deployment. And I'll disable all these things. I'll say networking also. I'll disable for now. Monitoring is something that I won't need it right now. I will take monitoring and alerting in a separate session in this particular week. So I'll just say no. I'll say review and create this out. So I'm now reviewing and creating my app service and the app service plan out here as such. This is a tier, or this is, let's say, the application tier that I'm now creating, which will act as my front end. So all this is my front end. All this is my back end. It's background. Come back here. Let's give it a minute so that your plan and the app service can be provisioned, and let's see how it really works out here as such. Again, this being a platform as a service, I don't have the capability to mention a lot of things. It's not an infrastructure as a service, it's a platform as a service that I'm creating. And as a platform as a service, I'm just telling this particular application to go ahead and install something called .NET, something like that, using something called the runtime stack. And now I have the application tier RG, inside which I have a plan. If I go into the plan called demo plan here, into the apps here, I have the app tier web app USEs to something like this, which is my actual Azure web app out here. So let's just go here. This is my actual app service, which is Azure web app and etc. The status is running. You have things like browse, and you'll have a couple of options like, let's say, the URL, the, let's say, FTP hostname and so on and so forth. So let me copy the URL, and I'll also provision the URL. I'll also give the URL to you all. I'll just post it here in the chat. So this is the URL of the website that I've created. Let me paste this URL on the browser. Let's say enter. And this is what I have. This is a simple HTML page, what Microsoft is giving me when I create the app service. Anytime you create it, this is the first page that you actually see out here as such. Now, what I need to do is that I need to write a code as a developer. I'm now talking as a developer, not a DevOps engineer. This is not your work. As a developer, you need to write a code that can be deployed on top of this particular web application. Again, how do we deploy a code on top of a web application, guys? What do we do to deploy a code?
First, we need
How
to
do we
build the
deploy a
code. Then after,
I'm sorry, can you come again, please?
first we should build the code after development. Then we need to
Can
publish.
We
you
have
come
to add to slots, deployment slots.
the deployment starts, but how do we deploy it? Like, what do we do to deploy this code?
First of all, we have to build the code. What the developer
First of all,
develop.
yes. First of all, we have to build the code. So firstly, when a developer gives you a code, he writes the code in his local laptop.
Yes.
We have to first build the code using a tool called Visual Studio.
Studio.
And then we have to do a publish. This is what we have to do. Again, writing the code is not our duty. As a DevOps engineer, yes, I'm interested into building the code and publishing the code. Writing the code is not our duty. This is the duty of a developer. Developer has to write a code in such a way that when this code, or when the application is requested, I as a user, if I'm requesting for the application, this application should use this code and connect to the server and grab the data from that particular server out here. This is what the code needs to do. And this is where I give you the code. This is where we don't need the code to write. We don't have to write the code. I have a ready-made code for us that we can use for our demos. So let me go there and share the link with you all. And let's see. I'll share this particular link with you all. We'll see on what this link is at a later point. So yesterday I gave you this one called SQL commands and etc. Today I'll give you a link directly to the code out here. So I'll just send across this particular link. Please bookmark this and please send it across in the WhatsApp group so that people can access this out. Again, this is an open link. You can just click on this. You can do a lot of downloads and all that stuff. This is good enough. So this is all the code that the developer has written. I have all the code that the developer has written. What I expect from you all is this. Go to this link, click on more options here, say download. First download this particular code. You will get a zip file. A .zip file is what you'll get. So let's wait for this particular .zip file to be downloaded. Once it's downloaded, it looks something like this. It's called SQL app, something like this. I'll just go ahead and extract this out. So I'm just going ahead, unzipping this particular file so that I have all the code with me. This is all my code. So what I want you to do is very simply do a double click on this particular file called sqlapp.sln. If you double click this, it will open the code in Visual Studio 2022. As a developer, what we do is that we start with Visual Studio, write the code, and then we go ahead and let's say do a build and then deploy. Now what we are doing, we are not writing a code. We are using an existing code. We're just opening the code out here. So let's wait for a second. Let's open the code out here. And in the right hand corner of my screen, I have all the code that is exposed. All the code is what is exposed out here. So what I'll do is, as a DevOps engineer, I have the code right now. I have not written it. I have not even touched it. The developer has given me the code. I'm good with that. I'll do a right click and I'll first say build to convert the code from a high level language to a low level language, or also called as binaries. Zeros and ones is what I'm converting my code into. I'll say build. So now it's telling the project SQL app is getting built. So let's give it a minute. It will take like a minute or so to get built. And once it's built, it's telling, you know what, this is a SQL which is built good enough. I'll say, okay, fine. Now publish. And now it's saying, okay, fine, getting ready for publishing again. Since I did this earlier, it is showing me this one. I'll say new. And normally for you, what it does show you is this one. Let's click the new. And this is the screen that you'll get. It's asking me, where do you want to publish the code? I'll say it is Azure. Next, it's telling where or what is the service that you want to publish in Azure. We created app services, Windows. I'll say yes, next. And now it's asking me, okay, fine, your credentials. And now it's identifying the resource group inside which your app service is there. And today I have not created a slot. I'm directly deploying it out. So you can optionally create a slot and swap it, not a problem. If you want to create a slot, again, you have to scale up your plan to S1 and then have the slot created. Now I'll say, okay, fine, this is the app service. I'll say finish and close, and I'll publish this out here as such. So I'm now using the code that a developer has given me. I'm doing a build and I'm then starting, or I'm then doing a publish on top of the app service that I have created. So I am doing a build and release. This is what I'm doing. I'm doing a build and release. So I'm building the code, deploying it on top of, let's say, this particular Azure app service that just got created. So let's look at this. So now it's telling successfully restarted the web application, successfully installed, and it's telling, okay, fine, successfully restarted. It's restarting the web application, code published successfully and all that stuff. And let's go back. Let's go into our app service and we'll say browse. And this is what is the error that I'm getting. It's telling the page is not working. So after the code is deployed, I'm getting this error. Before the code is deployed, did I get this error? No, I did not get this error. Now, what do you all think is the issue? Or what do you all think can be the issue here? Let's try and troubleshoot it out. Let's ask some questions out here. Is what do you all think is the issue? Any random guesses?
Server not connected.
I'm sorry, can you come again, please?
Server is not connected.
Server is not connected. When you say server is not connected, what is not connected to the server?
No, I was just randomly guessing the 500 error.
SQL
So
server is
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, you are close. That's right. Server is not connected. But what needs to be connected to the server?
SQL server.
SQL server. Yes,
Backend,
SQL server is
backend,
The code
backend
is
tier
not
should connect.
SQL data.
okay. SQL. Okay. But what needs to be connected to the SQL? Do I need to be connected to the SQL? Or what do you think here needs to be connected to the SQL out here?
App service
The
plan
app
needs to be
service
connected to
plan needs to
SQL.
be
App
connected.
service plan, or
Yeah,
is it the app service? App
app
service
service,
plan, app service,
app
exactly.
service.
Meaning, this is the URL of the website that I'm working on right now. So let me get the proper URL. Let me paste it here instead of, let's say, this one. This is the URL of the website that I'm working with. And when I, as a user, am interacting with this particular website called app tier web app us2.azure websites.net, the request is going to the app service. How is the request going to the app service? This is called DNS resolution, domain name service resolution, which means if I take this domain name, right? If I take this domain name called app tier web app us2.azure websites.net, go to a PowerShell. So I have a PowerShell. I can go here into PowerShell. I'll say resolve hyphen DNS name. It's a command. Hyphen name. I'll just put the name here. Okay, I missed an A here. I'll just put the name here. I'll say enter. Do you see I'm getting an actual IP address whenever you are interacting with a website? This is what happens. In the background, you get an actual IP address. Your computer needs to understand what is the IP address out here. This is the IP address of a backend running virtual machine which is hosting all your code. Can I see this virtual machine? No. It's a platform as a service. It's a PaaS service. This VM is not exposed. It's just the app service that you can see. This is the app service you can see. App service is going into the backend virtual machine, and that backend virtual machine is having a public IP address. And this is what you see. Any website will work in the same way. Any website that you see will work in the same way. For example, let's say resolve-dns name, and let's say that instead of, let's say, going for some Azure websites.net, I'll say google.com. Popular website. I'll say enter. Even this has so many IP addresses out here. It has an IPv6, it has an IPv4. This is the backend running virtual machine which is hosting the Google website out here. Or this can be the backend running load balancer IP, and behind that load balancer you can have multiple service. So this is how the website is designed. So in my case, what is happening right now is this. As and when I, as a user, is going to this particular website, my browser is able to, let's say, do a DNS resolution to something called 20, something like 20, something like this, which is the IP address of my app service. Can you see the IP address of your app service? Yes, you can. If you go here, just scroll down into something called custom domains. And here, same IP that you saw on my Windows PowerShell also, same thing. So now I'm getting here, but after I get here, this app service is now trying to reach out to, let's say, SQL Server, and then from there it's going to the SQL database trying to get the data. Now, just imagine I am a user, backend user. If I want to get the data, what should I do? If I want to get the data, what am I doing?
Sending a request to the databases.
Sending a request to the database. How am I sending a request to the database? How am I
Username and
really interacting?
password by use.
Username,
First, we
password.
need to log
Exactly.
in.
Exactly.
Yes.
Username and password. I need to have a username and password. So what I'm doing is, as a user, just imagine this as a user, this will itself help you understand what should a web application do. If I go into my data tier and if I go into my database, if I say query editor, I'll need to give a username and password. Only then I can log in. So firstly, I'm giving a username and password. And after I give a username and password, I'm running a query telling what?
Select,
Select star
select
from
start from
dbo.codes, and I'll say enter. And this is how I'm getting the data. Same way, my web application should also have something called as username and password. So web app should also have what? Username and password. And after logging in, it should run a SQL query, run an SQL query out here to get the data. The SQL query is taken inside it's taken care inside the code. That's something that we don't have to worry about. So if you look at, let's see, controller, and let's look at this one. So this is all the code. I'm just giving you an example on how it, let's say, goes out. Let's see. Course controller starter program. Let's see, model services. Okay, fine. Do you see I have an SQL query here telling select course ID, course name, rating from what? What is this course? If you just copy this query, right? Just put it into your query editor, getting the same result. So even if I do a select star, instead of, let's say, giving these column names explicitly, you can just select everything, or you can give the column names and you can run. You're getting the same thing, right? Code already has a query. What does it not have right now?
username and password.
Username and password. Exactly. Your web application now doesn't have a username and password to interact with the SQL database. Okay. Ravalika, can you please go on mute? I'm getting a little bit of echo at your end. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Okay. The web app doesn't have now the username and password, and this is provided in the form of something called as a connection string. Did you hear about this term anywhere? Connection string? Anywhere did we hear about this particular terminology called connection string? Did you come
Storage
across
account.
this one in storage
Storage account.
accounts? Exactly.
Yes.
Storage accounts, connection strings. Same way, if you go into a database, you have something called what? Show database connection strings. This has something known as a connection string. Again, the connection string will vary depending upon the code that you're using. For a .NET application, you have what? This particular connection string. For a Java based application, you have this one. For a PHP, you have, a different way. For a Golang, you have different, completely different out here. I'm using a .NET application, so I'll take this particular connection string value and let me paste it inside my notepad. And this is how it look like. It's saying server, the name of the server, which is something .databases.windows.net, the initial catalog, the name of the database. Then you have something like versus security and etc. And you have what? User ID, and it's asking you to give the password. So I'll take this out and I'll give the password. Where did I give the password right now? Who should I give this connection string to right now? Who needs this connection string? Should I give
User,
it to you?
backend.
Backend user? Backend user doesn't need
Yes.
it. Backend user already has the let's say credentials. I'm taking the credentials and I'm logging.
API
SQL
call.
database.
Application.
Application, exactly. It's your application who needs this, not a backend user. It's your application who's trying to talk to, let's say, your SQL server, not the user. So I'm copying this out, and now I'm going into my application tier. In my application tier, I know that my app service needs this connection string. I'll go into the app service. I'll go into something called as the configuration of the app service. This comes under the settings, under the configuration. And once the configuration loads, let's see how it works out here. You have application settings and you have what? Connection strings. This is where I'll say add a new connection string. I'll say very importantly, guys, for this demo, please give the name of the connection string as SQL connection. The code is looking for this one, so please give it as SQL connection. Value, whatever you copied, right? Paste it here. Type, it is not MySQL. It is not a MySQL out here. It is a SQL Azure. And I'll say okay. I'll say save. So I'm giving a connection string to my application, and this connection string works as a credential for my application to talk to, let's say, this particular SQL server and grab the data. And once the connection string is updated, please go into the overview and restart your application once. Whenever you update your connection strings or the application settings, it's a suggested approach to go ahead and restart your applications out. So once you restarted, give it a minute, come back to your application, try to restart or try to refresh your browser, and let's see what do we get out here as such. List of services is now coming up, which means that my connection is established, which means this is the flow, right? As a user in the front end, I'm hitting this particular website. This is going to the backend running app service that is establishing a connection with the SQL server, sending a query to this particular database telling select star from course. The database is giving it all the data, and it is now exposing all the data to me over the internet. Over the internet out here. See, most of your let's say, when you get results, right? 10th class results, intermediate results, and all that stuff, you see it on a website. You don't go to the database and see it. The government has it inside the database. They cannot give you the password. Imagine what will happen if they give you the password. You can go and change your results. Very simple. That will not happen, right? In the website, what will happen? You will have a page. Very simple page. This is a very, very simple page. The government website has a page telling you what is your ID, your hall ticket number. Once you give your hall ticket number, say submit, what will happen is that it will do a backend query telling select star from something, some kind of a table where ID is equal to your hall ticket number. And from there, you'll get all the results and it will be displayed in the same way out there. So this is how the backend running process, or this is how the process actually goes ahead right now as such. Yes, any questions till here? Anyone, any questions till here that I can take? So to go through this particular demo, you will need firstly the SQL commands. I shared the SQL commands yesterday, and you also need the code, which I shared it today. And finally, you as a DevOps engineer should create all these things. As a DevOps engineer, we create the application tier, we create the data tier, we also go ahead and establish a connection string between the application tier and the data tier, and make sure to get all these things into picture out here as such. Yes, any questions still here that I, that I can take? Anyone, any questions that I can take?
The application hierarchy and data hierarchy should be in the same region.
Application RG, data tier RG should be in the same region. Most likely should be in the same region. That's the reason I created both of them in the same region. Reason being, it will decrease your latency. Meaning, now just imagine that your application is making a call to the data tier. Imagine the application is sitting in a different location, data is sitting in a different location. The calls will be very slow. Sometimes the calls will drop. So you will get application errors and all these things. So best suggested practice, make sure that the application and the data are in the same region.
And there is a backend running virtual machine that is connected to the app service plan and a SQL server, right?
There is a backend running virtual machine which is connected to the app service plan. No, uh, it's not like that. There is a backend running instance, meaning there's a backend running virtual machine that is here, and all the code is sitting on top of this particular virtual machine only. Meaning, very simple, if you're requesting the application, it's going to the virtual machine, taking the code, then establishing connection with the SQL server out here as such. So it's partially correct, but this backend running virtual machine is something that we cannot see. So we are just considering that the app service is itself a virtual machine for us.
Okay. Means we can connect the number of virtual machines.
Sorry, can you come again, please?
Can we connect multiple virtual machines to the app service?
Can you connect multiple virtual machines to the app service? No, not really. You can connect multiple virtual machines to the app service plan. It's not the app service. App service is nothing but a process that is running on top of the, let's say, virtual machine out here. So yes, as of now, I'm in free. I'll also show you how to add number of instances out here in the background. But yes, to answer to your question, yes, you can add multiple instances of the virtual machine in the background. Those are called the number of workers.
Yeah, we have seen in the PowerShell command,
Yes,
right?
correct.
Okay. So number of workers means number of instances.
Instances of a virtual machine that are running in the background. Yes.
Sir, what about that worker size? Something small is there? What exactly it means?
I'm sorry. Can you come again, please? Your voice is a little low.
Sorry, while using PowerShell, I observed something called a worker. Sorry, worker and work small something is there.
Mm-hmm.
Worker size.
Small.
Worker size is small.
Yes, worker size is nothing but your app service plan. It's just asking you what is the plan on which you want to run that particular, let's say, app service on. So you can ignore that for now. Once we take what is worker, we'll also talk about what is worker size and all these things.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Now, last but not the least, as a DevOps engineer, you are also responsible to establish security in your organization. This is also something that we need to make sure about. So to secure this resource called as a SQL server, right now my SQL server is a platform as a service is exposed out there in the internet. To limit the number of connections to this particular SQL server, what can we do? What do we need to do out here? Let's think about it. What comes into your mind when I say securing a resource? How did you secure a storage account?
Network,
VNet,
virtual network.
virtual
Yes.
network, exactly. Can I get the same virtual network out here and secure the SQL database out here? Of course, yes. Firstly, I'll just go ahead, say virtual network. I'll create a virtual network here, and I'll just go ahead say this is a demo VNet. Same region, ECS2. I'll just go here security IP addresses. I'll take the default IP address. I'm good with that. Default subnet. I'm good with that. I'll just review and create. It's running a validation to see whether everything that I've given is good enough. I'll say create this out. So I'm creating my virtual network out here. And once I create the virtual network, I'll integrate this particular virtual network with my SQL server. This is what I'm going to do out here as such. So let me give it a minute so that the virtual network is created. Virtual network is created. And once the network is created, I'll now start integrating this particular network out here with that particular, let's say, SQL server out here as such. So let me give it a second. And this is done. Virtual network is created. And this particular virtual network has one subnet out here as such. So what I'll do is now I'll go into my let's say data tier out here. I'll say SQL Server. In here, I'll go into networking. Inside the networking, I'll say add a virtual network rule. I'll say rule 1, what is the virtual network? This is a demo VNet that I just created. I'll say enabling the service endpoints and say OK. I'm now adding a virtual network rule out here. And now I'm telling only the connections from this particular network are allowed to talk to the SQL server. Apart from this network, no one else is allowed to talk to this particular SQL server out here as such. So this will take a minute. And after that, I see a new rule that is created. State is ready. And I can remove all these IP addresses out here. Done. I have now attached my virtual network out here. I have gotten a virtual network onto my onto my backend tier, and I'm now isolating my entire backend applications like the SQL Server and the database out here. I'm isolating the entire thing out here as such. Getting it? Any questions till here? Anyone? Any questions I can take till here? Are you good till here? Anyone? Any questions I can take? Anyone? Any questions? Sorry. Any questions, guys? Okay. Then no questions. Then I'm good to close the session. Tomorrow we'll be looking into scaling and all these things. So we'll see what is auto scaling and etc. We'll be using the same example, the same architecture, same example out here. We'll look at what is scaling and all these things out here as such. Thank you and have a good day ahead. Thanks, guys.